anticipated Friday business roundup. A very good afternoon to you, Victor Kgomoeswana, who's author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. Now, Victor is also the Executive Director for Marketing and Communications at the University of Limpopo. I hope you are having a splendid Friday, Victor.
Good afternoon, Tammy. Good to talk to you again. I'm sure you are doing all right, but I am all right on this side of town.
Great to hear that. Now, Victor, let's perhaps start off with a look at the educational sector in Nigeria specifically. I was just talking to my colleagues earlier on that Nigerians are actually known to be one of and some of the most educated nations in the world. A lot of them have contributed in various areas, but quite alarming to see that remuneration for professors in Nigeria is not quite up to par.
It's not, and the sad thing is, if you are the largest population, and Africa is celebrated, Tammy, for having the youngest population or potential to have the youngest population in 2030. The one major investment you have to make is education. And to know that the university professors are earning 13 times less than what the South African professors are earning is astonishing. On average, this, according to the Academic Staff Union of Universities, it's $58,000 a year for a South African professor. That's the average. Compare that to $4.4 thousand a year for a Nigerian professor. I mean, that is a way of just killing a whole higher education sector. And the problem is, there used to be expatriates who worked at Nigerian universities. That is not, the former Skiam Pasele, if you remember, the literary giant, the South African literary giant who taught everywhere. Among the places where he made a stop, Nigeria was counted. And to now know that they are earning as little as 4.4 per annum, $4.4 thousand per annum, less than countries like Lesotho, countries like Ghana, and even Malawi. That is astonishing. And this is the problem, Tammy. You can't create new knowledge if you don't have professors, because those are people who supervise PhDs, which means for a very long time yet, African students will still be reading books written by non-Africans, if I may say, and that means we will forever be subjugated to the knowledge systems of other continents, and that's a tragedy.
I wonder, Victor, if we look at this in context and we look at the remuneration scales in other sectors in the Nigerian economy, how does this fare? Is it a country where, comparatively speaking, the earning margins are significantly lower than their African peers?
No. Nigeria is a mixed bag, Tammy. If you are talking Aliko Dangote, people like Jimovia, those are the high earners. They are the highest earners in Africa. But the average wages in Nigeria are not necessarily high because it's still per capita income lower than most African countries. But it's when you look at the academic sector, the higher education sector, that you are. Somebody, chairman of the Academic Staff Union of South Africa, talked about the same Nigerian government will send experts, Nigerians, to study abroad or to work abroad and spend about $2,000 per person per month. So at least pay those professors $2,000. If you're spending that money for somebody who's working abroad or who's studying abroad, then just spend it on people who are teaching at home so that you can attract the best. But no, it's not the highest in terms of wages, but definitely not. With regard to this, it's a real shocker because this is the sector that produces all the other sectors.
No, it certainly is. And just a bit of a change in gears, we see a lot of investment, a lot of impact and investment in the continent's defense markets by the likes of Turkey, UAE, China. Why?
Yeah, this is a speech. It's what we've always talked about, Tammy. You listen to President Trump, you look at European countries and their attitude towards the African continent. They have done business with the African continent. They have invested here, but they have done it on on an unequitable or on a basis that was not just economically. Come in the Chinese, come in the Turks, come in the Arabs, and they are showing that Turkey at the moment is supplying arms, armored vehicles, drones, and things like that, helicopters, to more than 20 countries. This was not the case 5 or 10 years ago. UAE, defense and diplomacy, China. Among the other reasons is that China is said to be, according to this report by somebody who works at St. James Strategic Services, who was speaking at the Global Industrial Cooperation Association conference, and said China can provide 75% of what the West can provide in defense, but for 50% of the price. So it's a no-brainer that China can do exactly the same thing that Germany can do, that the British can do, but they will say that you get at half price. So if you're looking to buy 2 helicopters, it's a no-brainer that if you're an emerging poor country in Africa, you're not going to buy 1, you're going to buy 2 for the price of 1 by going to China. And it's not just defense. I worked for a cement company. It was using European technology and equipment, and when they built a new plant in 2013, they went 100% to China for the same technology.
So as far as Africa is concerned, or the continent is concerned, is it an issue of increased procurement? What are the dynamics there? How are these 3 countries making their influence felt?
I mean, look at the countries that are, one country that is dominant in the Turkish exports, Arabic exports and the Chinese exports is Nigeria. West African countries are doing a lot of patrol. You know, the boats that you use to patrol the shores, because there's a lot of illegal fishing, a lot of security, and you're seeing countries like Mali, countries like Niger and Burkina Faso, where there's a lot of increased military activity, either with a coup or anything. But over and above that, there are lots of developments. Look at Mozambique, where you have Total Energies building a huge factory, but it was suffering under the Al-Shabaab insurgents that were making Cabo Delgado unstable. So part of it is just outright military action, the unconstitutional removal of governments, and then governments are having to beef up their security. Sometimes it's terror attacks, and sometimes it's illegal fishing that will make it necessary for countries to patrol their borders or their oceans much more aggressively.
Now, this, Victor, is something that we do know. We've actually discussed it quite extensively. But once again, a report by the World Trade Organization revealing that it costs African nations around 20% more to trade amongst themselves than it does for them to trade with other continents. What sense is there in that?
Well, what sense? There is no sense. The Dr. Ngozi Ogonjo-Iweala, who is the former finance minister of Nigeria and a former president of the World Bank, now at the World Trade Organization, saying she says that's exactly the reason only 15% to 20% of the trade of exports from Africa goes to other African countries. She was talking on CNN to Christian Amanpour, and she said that's exactly the reason. There's no sense, Fanny, because if you do not invest in infrastructure, you are going to find, and let me simplify it for you. When people talk about doing business in Africa, they talk about corruption. You get to a weighbridge, somebody else wants you to give them cold drink to let your truck through. That is the cost that they are talking about. They are mainly non-tariff barriers. It's not even that the costs or taxes are higher. It's just that there are so many barriers that make it difficult to do business. You want to get a license to trade, to import, somebody says, give me a little something to get your cargo through. You get your cargo stuck at the port and so on. So it's all those little things before we even come to the quality of the roads. Sometimes the non-alignment or the lack of seamless transition in railroad infrastructure. So that when you get to the border, you have to offload off this train onto another train or just get to a road altogether. When you're flying, the same deal. So it's all those tariff and non-tariff barriers as well as the infrastructure limitations that will make this more difficult to do trade with African countries or among African countries.
And I think that what's problematic about that, Victor, is the fact that a lot of this is attitudinal, it's cultural, it's behavioral.
Definitely.
So it's not necessarily that you can pour money into it. It's not about building a road. It's not brick and mortar. It's not cement. but it's people's attitude and belief systems, which is a whole lot more difficult to fix.
Amen, Tammy. Amen. You're getting in the weekend mode. You're preaching only truth. You're preaching only truth. That's the explanation I was looking for.
So look, Victor, as we wrap up, Mozambique just throwing millions of dollars away,
exactly,
repaying debt to China. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, 15% of Mozambique's external debt is to one country, and this is no exception. Most African countries are in the same state, Tammy. They owe China a lot of money. Mozambique owes China a lot, even with the forgiveness. China gave a donation of over $14 million, but it still had to pay in the month January to March. They still had to pay $42 million, which includes $6.7 million in interest alone. So 6.7 million in interest, you can imagine what other countries are doing. But 380 million it owes to Portugal, $405 million it owes to Japan. This is just according to stats in June. But it shows you just how much money in Africa is going to paying off debt. And I'm sorry, it's not getting better, not at the moment. And as I said, Mozambique is not the only country in this situation.
I tell you what, Victor, when we talk about Africa and its debt burden, it often sounds like quicksand. It often sounds like a mire that one cannot get out of. There's debt, but getting out of that debt almost sounds like an impossibility.
And we are stealing from our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, because they are going to be paying this debt long after we are gone. We have to really think twice about it before we get into debt, especially if we don't have good governance to make sure that the money goes to do what it was supposed to do. Dan.
Well said, Victor Kgomoeswana. Thank you so much. Really interesting developments as far as business on the African continent is concerned. Victor Kgomoeswana always keeping us abreast. Have yourself a great weekend.
Have a good weekend, Tammy. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That's Victor Kgomoeswana, author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. Victor is also the Managing and Communications Director, Executive Director at the University of Limpopo. It has gone exactly 26 minutes after 4 p.m.
Africa means business.